That's the one. Cool. Can you see this slides?
Yeah. Cool.
Cool. Okay. Okay. So firstly, thanks for joining. Yeah, I'm going to go through these slides relatively quickly because I'm assuming most people are familiar with this stuff. And then we can discuss, I guess, follow-ups to this, which is Hyder-V gates or the different trade-offs that exist. Lookups, whether it's, you know, the current state of lookups. So briefly, Sangria is a folding scheme, and folding schemes were introduced in Nova. I think you had Srinath on here recently talking about supernova, so I guess you have a bit of background there. They describe folding for R1CS specifically, or a variant of R1CS. And we're kind of interested in doing the same thing for PLONK-ish arithmetization. Skip over the rest. Some motivation. So this is what IVC looks like. I'll assume, unless someone gets very angry at me, that we can go over this quickly. The same function f is repeated many times on a state that gets carried through. And we want to do one proof, one succinct proof, that some prover, a single prover, knows all these witness values. The verifier should only see the first and the last states and knows the function f. So that corresponds to prolapse, ZKVMs. Again, I think this audience is familiar with IVC. How do we do IVC? I think this is like the Valiant construction, where you have this proof that gets carried along and updated with every proving step. And the question is sort of, what is this proof and what do we do to it? And whatever we do to it, that is like the additional cost that we're putting in. And we're gonna have to additional over just performing the IVC. And this cost we're paying for at every step. So we kind of really want to minimize it. The first approach was the snark approach. You read the proof, you run the verifier, and that's it, you're happy. Second approach is what they do in Halo, saying you read the proof, you run just part of the verifier inside your circuit, and you defer the hard part till the very end, and you only do it once. And so this deferral, like doing only the easy part in circuit, turns out it gives you a smaller circuit, so you have a smaller overhead to pay for. Similarly, the split accumulation technique then came out. And this sort of says, all right, you only need to read part of the proof and run part of the verifier at every step. And reading the whole proof and doing the whole verification, you can do only once at the very end. So again, you have this sort of deferral mechanism, which allows you to have a smaller circuit, a smaller overhead. And this is actually like the first overhead that is constant, no matter how big your circuit is, no matter how big the computation F you're doing, the overhead will always be constant. And then you have the Nova approach, which you could argue is also like a folding scheme, like a folding scheme, and a split accumulation scheme. And we can talk about that afterwards if you want, how like folding falls under split accumulation. But what you do with folding is you kind of defer proving, actually. So you're going to work with instances and witnesses, unproven, and you compress them into each other. That's what the folding is. And proving, you defer to the very end. So you only prove once a circuit of approximately the size of F. But somehow this one problem contains all the previous problems. And so here, yeah, the question is, can we bring this to, PLONK-ish type things? So Lev had a comment in the chat. I think technically overhead of the neighbor approach is also constant, just big. That depends on what snark you're using. If you're doing ROF16, then yes. Most other snarks, I think, have at least a logarithmic verifier. Okay, PLONK arithmetization. This I'll skip pretty quickly. You have your selectors, which are fixed, copy constraints, which are also fixed. The selectors and the copy constraints together define the circuit and the computation you're doing. You have this rule, which applies at every row. And this rule or gate, however you like to call it, you can actually change it and you can play around with it, and that's what we call custom gates. And the important part is the trace, the part on the right hand side, is divided into like a short instance part and a long witness part. And the prover works with the long witness, and the succinct verifier will only look at the instance. Cool. Now the definition of a folding scheme. It's a protocol between two parties, a prover and a verifier. Sorry. The prover has two instance witness pairs. The verifier just has the two corresponding instances. Prover sends a message, verifier sends some randomness, and at the output, the prover will have a new instance witness pair, and the verifier has a new instance. And the two important properties here are completeness. So if the two incoming instance witness pairs satisfy the circuit, then so does the outcoming one, the output pair. And the important part is knowledge soundness. So if some prover knows a valid witness for the output instance, then it must have known valid witnesses for the two input instances. And this is actually super powerful, because you're now saying knowing this one witness is as good as or super close to knowing these two witnesses. Cool. So how do we do this for PLONK? We're going to take pages from Nova's book, or just cryptography in general. The first attempt is random linear combination. So I'm representing my traces as little matrices. This is both the instance and the witness part. I have trace prime plus r times trace second equals some final trace. So visually, you can see that the copy constraints are preserved. Like if a prime 1 equals b prime 3 and a second 1 equals b second 3, I'm talking about the blue squares here. If these blue squares are equal, then so will the blue squares on the right-hand side. So that's super nice. And that's kind of, I think the main worry people had when trying to fold PLONK is, are copy constraints preserved? Because there's this whole ground product argument, and it looks scarier than it is. The real problem is the gate equation, because it's not linear. And once you do distribute it out for this final trace, you will end up with terms that you can't shove back into the same gate equation. So how do we fix that? We apply what we learned from Nova, that you can relax your gate equation. And in the case of Nova, it's like one global equation, but in our case, it's just for one row, but that's not a problem. And to keep parties honest and to make sure that we have this knowledge soundness property, the verifier will have commitments to the witness. And the prover will work over the whole trace because it's allowed to do work that's linear in the size of the trace, whereas the verifier will work only with commitments because we want the verifier to be super small. So this brings us to this relaxed PLONK arithmetization, where a witness is still a PLONK witness, but we add this new vector, which we call the error vector. And we call it the error vector kind of because Nova does it too. Some people call it the slack vector, the noise vector. It is what it is. This vector is the same, like it's a column in your trace. It's a whole column. The instance of your relaxed arithmetization is again a classic instance. So the top part of the matrix, a scalar u, and commitments to all the witness, including the error vector. And again, this will allow us to have knowledge soundness. And this, at the bottom, you have the relaxed gate equation. And the key idea here is that you want it to become homogeneous. You want every term in this sum to be of the same degree. So the selectors are fixed because we have a fixed circuit. So we don't count these as variables, but everything else counts as a variable. Ignore actually the error vector as well. Everything else counts as a variable. So if you look to this equation, you have this AI, BI, this is of degree 2, and this is the highest degree we have. So we're going to have to make everything else degree 2. And we use u as like this dummy variable kind of. So we have u squared times qc because this qc is not a variable. All this stuff on the left, which is all degree 1, I multiply by u again to get to degree 2. Why do we care about getting something homogeneous? This is sort of as before. This is what I'm trying to get to. Because once you do distribute gates of final trace, and by I mean like one row of the final trace, you will have a polynomial in R, which is like this folding value. And it will be gates of the first trace plus some cross terms plus your highest degree times gates of your final trace. And this is where the error vector comes in. The error allows us to sort of remove this cross term or make it disappear. And this, I'm also happy to go into more detail about in a second. Here's what the protocol looks like. So T, as you see, it's R times T. T is actually fully determined by our gate equation, so the rule. So T can be computed by the prover before any kind of interaction, before even knowing how it's going to fold. It's going to commit to T, send it over to the verifier. The verifier samples some randomness, sends it over, and now we can perform folding. The prover folds as we saw over the trace. And I'll read in a second. Sorry, I see there's a question in the chat. The prover folds with all the trace values, and then we have the special folding for the error vector. The verifier does the exact same thing, but over commitments. Recall that these commitments W prime A, W second A were part of the instances. This is how the verifier has them. So the verifier manages to derive commitments to the new witness without ever seeing any of the witnesses. Question in the chat, I'm feeling confused. This was for quadratic constraint or for cubic? This is for quadratic. I think everything was of degree 2. Happy to discuss more if you're still confused, if you want to go over it some more.
No, I mean just in PLONK, typically you have cubic constraint. So these are equations for Nova.
So as far as I know, PLONK works with this equation, bottom left here.
Yeah, okay, and it's cubic because the equation that you wrote
no, sorry, I'm
cubic.
Sorry?
You have relaxed it by using u, you have relaxed it to the cubic equation. So these formulas will there will be different formulas with 2 cross terms for cubic.
Are you counting the selectors as variables when you say cubic? I'm saying here that
okay,
QM
selectors are fixed. I got
it.
Selectors are fixed. Okay, then it's quadratic. I'm sorry. That was the source of my confusion.
Yeah, no problem.
Sorry,
yeah,
sorry.
So
since we're just on the topic of gates and degrees, so we need the thing to be homogeneous. That makes sense. What are the trade-offs in terms of having higher degree? Like, say you do want cubic. Yeah. I mean, yeah.
About to get there. I think that was for the next slide. Just one quick thing. The definition of folding scheme sort of says, let C be a circuit. So you fix the circuit. So you do fix the selectors. We can, and we have discussed this together, Lev, consider the circuit to not be fixed. And then we're talking about a whole different thing. So the trade-offs, here we go. So this is kind of the interaction. I omitted a lot of things from this little diagram. This actually shows kind of the protocol in full. And we can sit and read through it if you want. There's just a typo here. The R shouldn't exist, right? Because the R is provided later. But otherwise, yeah, what it looks like. So prover does these point additions, and actually, verifier does these point additions. So, and in practice, you'll be folding an instance that is not yet relaxed into a relaxed instance. So one of these error terms is just going to be 0, so you can just ignore it. And so we end up with just 4 additions. Or yeah. Or I can't count. Yeah, no, 4. And now the question is wider circuits and higher degree gates. So now we're getting to what you're asking, Ole. So wider circuits, you'll have more columns, therefore you'll have more witness commitments. And so if we go back here, you'll have like a D column and you'll have a new commitment and a new addition. So it's one more addition per column. With the higher degree, we'll have this same strategy of taking our gate equation and making it homogeneous. But now the polynomial in R is going to be 1 more degree. So there's 1 more term in this polynomial. And so we'll have to deal with 1 more cross term. And again, if we go back here, for each cross term, the verifier will receive a commitment multiplied by the right power of R and added to the sum. So again, we have 1 extra point addition per degree that we're trying to get to.
Okay, I mean, that doesn't sound too bad. I guess there will be a linear overhead on the verifier in terms of the number of steps, right? Because for every step of the computation, you have to take this many, do this many additions.
Yes, so, okay, so this here, I'm just describing the folding scheme, but if you start talking about steps and actually IVC, what happens is you have a circuit that does the function f and the verifier. So it's actually the prover paying this. And yes, the prover will end up doing this 1 time per step. Yeah.
Doesn't sound too bad.
It's the main cost.
Okay.
Actually, the point additions are the main cost. And this is kind of what I'm outlining here. I'm saying, all right, Nova has their circuit for the folding verifier. It's about 20,000 constraints. And of those, 12,000 are for point addition. Bear in mind that this is R1CS constraints, and you can't fiddle around with them and make them, essentially you only have 1 multiplication per constraint. Whereas with a PLONK circuit, you can have kind of parallel multiplications. So can we speed things up? I don't know. And the point is, with every column you add, you have 1 more point addition to do, but maybe your point additions will be like 20% cheaper. Or like 30%. Like there is kind of an optimization game to be played here. And this is kind of for the circuit wizards. And sadly, you can't just draw out like a nice equation that says, oh, for every column I add, my thing gets X% cheaper. It's kind of like you'll have a step suddenly. So I'm not too sure about this, and that's why I have this marked as open question. That's kind of it for like the overview. I think now I was happy to just go through thoughts and questions, or if you wanted to go deeper into some of the math, I think this is the right time.
So I was still wondering, well, first of all, I think with the circuits, I mean, if you have higher degree custom gates, sure, you'll have to do 1 more point addition per step, but also you can reduce the depth of the circuit. So, you know,
correct.
There is it's not.
So the thing with the depth of the circuit is we actually only really pay for it once. And you only pay for it once you've folded all your steps together, then you do proving. And that's where the depth of the circuit will matter. But if you have enough steps, then that won't matter as much, right? Like you'll amortize that cost.
Right.
I think that in Nova, the step circuit, I mean recursion circuit cost is dominated by proving, not by point addition. I mean dominated by hash, not by point addition. Because point addition, at least if you are using 2 cycle, it is very cheap.
So this is kind of the count. I hope this is big enough in their circuit. So because there is non-native field arithmetic, they're using two curves, but it's essentially pretty much the same circuit on both sides of the curve. And with every cycle, you have to run whatever you're running on both sides of the curve. But yeah, what I'm pointing out here is this essentially, like this first line, scalar multiplications being 12,000 constraints.
Okay, then I'm wrong.
Yeah, I wish it was hashing, because hashing we can do very well with custom gates. Whereas point addition, I'm not sure. I do know that some people have been coming up with nice elliptic curve cryptography gates, but I'm not sure like how optimized they are.
And just for this folding, isn't there still a linear cost just in terms of fiat smearing, because the verifier has to check that the prover folds correctly at each step?
No.
No. That one came from the chat, but no, because so this is the idea, the whole point of having this overhead, you actually have the folding verifier within, you prove the folding verifier. So you prove that you have fiat smeared correctly.
Of course. Yeah. Nice.
Yeah, this is Nova, by the way. This isn't like something we came up with. What we just did was saying like, oh, okay, Nova has this nice modular design where if you have a folding scheme for a specific arithmetization, then you can build IVC. So we just like plugged in a new folding scheme. Also applies to Supernova, by the way. You could just plug in this kind of folding scheme into Supernova, and you then have Supernova with PLONK.
And in terms of checking copy constraints, that's also done at every step. So that's also just swallowed up by the.
Yep.
Yeah. Nice.
So the fact that you prove the verification, yeah. So actually, I take it back. The checking of the copy constraints only happens once at the very end. You fold everything together, and then you actually do your PLONK proof. If the completeness and knowledge soundness properties sort of tell us that as long as you're folding things correctly, the copy constraints will be preserved. So if you're folding things that do respect the copy constraints into each other, whatever comes out will also respect the copy constraints. So Lev in the chat is saying, I'd like to point out that you can really think about it like a system of polynomial equations of any degree. Yes, main insight is that you don't need quadratic equation, absolutely. This thing of making it homogeneous and then distributing out, yeah. You also don't need the gates to be the same on each row, absolutely. But again, the gates not being the same on each row means that you no longer have a folding scheme as per the definition of Nova. So you can no longer apply, I don't know what theorem they numbered it, but they have a theorem that says if you have a non-interactive folding scheme, then you have IVC. Because that thing no longer falls under folding scheme, we'd have to show again that you can have constructions from that thing.
I'm sorry, maybe I do not understand. So as far as I understood, you can just have sort of unstructured circuit with the polynomial equations of any degree. Then you make them homogeneous and then you fold them. And all the math works the same. Copy constraint is just a particular linear equation in this paradigm.
The math works the same. The question is, what do you check at the very end? How do you?
I check the final system of homogeneous equations with the error term. I do exactly the same as what you do in Nova or Sangria. My point is that particular kind of arithmetization does not matter. What really matters is that you have a system of polynomial equations.
and you just verify that they're satisfied.
Yeah.
That sounds right. But then, so the question is, how do you encode a relation or some computation into that system of equations? And
yeah, I mean,
when you start doing that,
R1CS is particular kind and PLONK is particular kind. I'm just saying you have more freedom. More freedom is always better, clearly.
Always better, yes, but you also want to be proving something, right? And essentially my worry is if you have something completely unstructured and you're combining, to not use the word folding, you're combining instances from different circuits, what set of selectors do you then use when
that's my point. You
verifying
do
this
not
final
need to
circuit?
use selectors. My point is that you do not need to use selectors if you're using custom gates. You, for example, can use one part of the circuit for hashing and other part of the circuit with high degree gates for point multiplication. And you do not need to have a lot of selectors for that. So you are not restricted with PLONK issue that you need to have the same gate on each row. That's my point. You actually just unlock the ability to use constraints of arbitrary degree.
Yeah. Like the math works out for sure. Where I'm worried is, what does it show? And can we still benefit from nice things like having holographic proofs, essentially like proofs where the verifier needs to read less information than the size of the circuit? Because also if you keep accumulating your circuit together, maybe you can also keep accumulating the verifying keys. I don't know. This very interesting. But again, like you wouldn't fall under the definition of folding scheme, which means that if you want to show that you can get IVC from this kind of construction, you'll have to prove it yourself. Which I see a smile. You don't seem too worried about it. But yeah.
Yo, something that would be very nice, but I don't think it's possible, is if you could take the witness instance pairs sort of independently of the not having to be recursive, so that you have like, you know, two things here and two things here, and then you prove them in parallel, and then you get this tree-like structure. Are there thoughts in that direction?
I think you can absolutely do that. And you can, so the thing with these IVC constructions is actually you can't keep going forever, because otherwise you lose knowledge soundness, essentially. One way of aggregating more things is by getting them into a tree structure, like you just described. That does mean that you will have to keep more things in memory. So the nice thing with IVC is with every step, you can forget about the previous steps because they've been compressed together. With the tree-like structure, you will have to remember more things. But yeah, it's absolutely possible. I haven't put much work into it so far. It's just like, oh, can we fold these things? And can we fold these things with more gates? Can we fold these things with more columns? Can we fold them with lookups? What to do with folding schemes? I don't know. How many times can we fold? I am not sure. And I actually 2 or 3 weeks ago on this specific study club, I was asking Srinath about this. I think if you say that your IVC is bounded by some constant, then you're fine. As soon as you want, I don't know. Further than that, I don't know, honestly. But yeah, people have been going a bit crazy about this. It's an understudy question for sure. Yeah, agreed. And it seems that, yeah, most people are confused. In all recursive snarks, all estimates are terrible in the sense that some are deteriorate exponentially. Yeah, mostly a technical quirk. I don't know how technical it is. I think the attack is just try. Like, Yeah.
Can you talk to the say super Sangria? Like, I mean, that
Yeah.
is the purpose of this, right? Like, we wanna build some cool sort of general computation machines around this.
Mhm.
How do you see the potential for that?
Honestly, I'm not sure. So Supernova in itself, I'm also curious. Like there is a big optimization thing going on where you can have multiple instructions, and at each step you only pay for that specific instruction. But at the end, you will have to run a prover for each one of these. The other thing is, I do think you have each of these instructions also has to do some IO. It has to essentially load in the current state and export it out. So if your instruction is much smaller, if it's just like an addition, if it's much smaller than this IO, you actually end up paying mostly for IO. So I don't think you can go down to one machine instruction per sort of like supernova circuit. You'll probably go, I don't know, a bit higher up. You'll have like essentially sub-processors. Like you'll have something for basic arithmetic, something for hashing, something for, but maybe by working with the PLONK arithmetization, we don't even need to go that far. Maybe it's enough to just have the monolithic circuits as we know them. I actually don't know. Again, this is more like we're doing this because it's possible and it kind of unlocks a big design space. And then I haven't thought about the actual like trade-offs themselves. We're like, hey, try it out. Yeah.
On that note, is anyone trying it out? Has it been coded up?
It's work in progress. So I know some 0xPark people have folding for any circuit that's been generated with Halo 2, like all that kind of stuff. So far, I've been working on kind of the back end of this, in that like I've been working on making the IVC part work and making the final snark work. Because this is one thing we're sort of forgetting about here, is like the final snark that we prove is no longer a classic PLONK. We have to prove this relaxed equation, and we have to prove this relaxed PLONK. And so we also have to show that these commitments are satisfied by the witness. If you do it naively in circuit, it's going to be very expensive. And this is also something that Nova do in their paper. They sort of explained, oh, here is how we modify Spartan. So this is something I should be writing out, honestly, like more formally, like how do we modify PLONK to verify this? It's relatively simple.
Thanks.
But yeah, to your question, implementation is work in progress. Sorry, Lev, I just saw. So what are these papers you're linking to? Attacks on recursive constructions? Okay, yes.
Defense of recursive constructions from non-existing attacks. I mean, different model, and now we suddenly have better estimates.
Okay.
Like the fact that the soundness error deteriorates exponentially is mostly because of our stupidity, and not because it actually deteriorates.
Right.
Is this like regarding the sort of like Plonky to Recursive Stark stuff as well? Is that what you mean? Where you're like running Fry on Fry proofs and kind of being like, ooh, does this work?
I think this applies to most IVC constructions. So I think when you take things as a tree, because you have this sort of inherent like logarithmic thing going on, you sort of work around this soundness, this knowledge soundness growing, the knowledge soundness error growing. As soon as you do your computation in a straight line, which is what IVC does, you have to deal with it, regardless of what kind of recursion you're using.
Well, we should use tree-like constructions regardless, because they can be proved in parallel, and they have no overhead. You still need to do n minus 1-fold in both cases. So you should just always use tree-like construction if you can.
If you can, yeah. So in some cases you can't, right? Or you would not want to. If you're trying to prove a whole blockchain, for example, and blocks keep coming in like at a certain interval, you can't actually take them all, draw a tree, and then add one.
Yeah, then you should do it like in Mina. Wait for 100 blocks,
Yeah,
then
do
organize them
batches.
into
Yeah.
tree, and then fold them in using normal incremental recursion.
Well, this is the thing, right? Because the chain grows linearly, but you can do this in logarithmic time. So there's going to be a sweet spot at which the time to aggregate these blocks is shorter than the time for new blocks. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, the other thing to consider here is, so far with folding schemes, we have these IBC constructions for a single prover, right? Because we are passing around these unproven instances and unproven witnesses. So the witness right now like keeps being passed around in the clear. So if you actually want zero knowledge from this, you'd have to mask it somehow. And I think Srinath has mentioned that he has ideas on how to do it for R1CS. And I do think it's possible regardless of the arithmetization you're working with. But right now, this is kind of a single prover thing or a no zero knowledge thing.
Wait, so you're saying that you could actually delegate proving Nova and zero knowledge? That's awesome. That's absolutely awesome.
Yeah, yeah. So this is something I sort of mentioned earlier when I was going through the table. But folding schemes you can see as a very special case of split accumulation. And within split accumulation, you sort of have the freedom to say, oh, my accumulator is actually zero knowledge with respect to the predicates I'm trying to prove. So here in our case, what we call an accumulator is the same thing as the predicate we're trying to prove. It's this relaxed PLONK arithmetization. And we keep passing this relaxed PLONK witness. But we could have a folding scheme where you have like relaxed PLONK gets folded into masked relaxed PLONK and outputs a masked relaxed PLONK. And we keep moving, like pushing those around. But again, that's something I haven't figured out, but it's something that is possible.
I mean, you can probably do this in should be possible, you know, with like a distributed trusted setup where as long as one party is honest, no one knows what comes out. You could probably have something like this work, no?
Ish. Those usually work well when maybe actually you'll get something similar, yes, where the only way to remove the masking is by everyone removing their own part of the masking. Yeah. The question is like, how do you mask in a way that doesn't break the verification of your circuit, but that still kind of keeps all the parties honest? And that's, that will come at some cost, like that will make things less efficient. And this is partly why, if I go back to the slide with all different recursions, this is partly why the construction in this split accumulation paper is more expensive than Nova's folding construction. One, because it's a bit more generic, and secondly, because it is still zero knowledge.
I think you can mask anything by losing roughly multiplicative factor of 2 in efficiency. It is of course bad, but you can involve an additional variable, which if it is 0, then every constraint is 0. Then you will create such masking witness and instance, and it will work, I guess. So everyone can, for such modified circuit, it will work. But I'm not sure, but it is indeed multiplicative slowdown by a factor of 2. So that's unpleasant. Not on the recursion, on the base case. Everybody, like everyone who is a source of zero knowledge proof will need to do this masking operation.
Yes. That sounds about right. The 2 times slowdown, I'm not sure about.
Yeah, I mean, maybe like
But,
naive way is 2 times slowdown. Maybe you can do better.
So if you want more ideas about this, I think go check the split accumulation paper. So it's proof carrying data without succinct arguments. I can wait, let me copy the link into the chat. There you go. Okay, any more questions?
Are you working on making lookup gates?
Yeah. So the intuition behind lookups, at least in PLONK, there's a nice pair of articles by Ariel Gabison about how a lookup can be obtained from a multi-set check, and a multi-set check can be obtained from 1 round of interaction and an extra column in your trace. And so there's a post recently by some, I think 0xSpark people still, about doing that specifically. The problem is you once again sort of lose the definition of folding scheme. You no longer have instance witness pairs of one relation being folded into an instance witness pair of the same relation. You're tinkering with the relation because you have this sort of intermediate stage where the relation now has, or the trace now has an extra column. So I think it does work, but we have to go through with it fully and actually have a proof for this thing. The proofs I saw were sort of, I think on the right path, but a bit too hand wavy.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know a single person who actually read my proof, so except of me yet. So I guess
I have not read it.
Yeah, but I mean, there is a direction towards this.
Yeah, I think lookups are extremely feasible with what we already know. Like to answer directly. Lev is having a big laugh.
Yeah, I mean, the thing I'm really wondering is if you actually can. Okay, maybe we should talk about it not on your talk. I guess. But yeah, I have a lot of questions, but
yeah. So we can connect offline.
Okay, do we have any other questions? It's like no. Okay, well, thanks very much for joining us, Nico. And
thanks for having me.
No problem. Thank you very much. Thanks everyone for joining.
Thanks, Nico. See ya.